Hey everyone, quick final announcement about tomorrow, May 19th, 2023. I'm going to be live streaming the last analysis in my series of analyzing all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. I'm going to be taking questions. I'm hoping that I'm going to have the opportunity to chat with some of you as well. It's going to be tomorrow, May 19th, 2023 at 1 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I hope you have the opportunity to make it. If not, it will be on demand following the recording. Thank you so much and enjoy the video. Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Lobet, Gott, unsern Herren, which translates to Praise God, our Lord. Apologies for being a little quiet today. I do have a bit of a sore throat. I'm hoping it clears up for tomorrow, but this chorale really not super exceptional as far as takeaways are concerned. I think we're just going to hop right into the analysis. So no key signature. We start on D minor, we end on D major, so I reckon the overall tonality of this chorale, despite there not being a key signature, is D minor. And just a quick point on that, it's common for Bach on the flat side of the key signature, the flat side of the circle of fifths, to omit one flat from the key signature, so D minor being the key that's typically associated with one flat. It's not super uncommon for him to use a flatless key signature because of his use of melodic minor, or so I speculate. So with that being said, let's hop in. D minor is our first chord, like I said. We then have D, A, D, and F. No need to reanalyze, just another D minor chord here. Lower suspension here in the bass, probably under the alto, where we have a 9-10 suspension, but we have C sharp, A, E, and E. A major over C sharp, which is 5-6, and then we get D minor again, D, A, D, and F. Tonic triad, root position, passing seventh in the bass, and then we get B flat, D, and G. G minor in first inversion, and we get ready for our half cadence. This is more specifically a Phrygian half cadence. The Phrygian half cadence consists of the sixth of the minor scale, that is the natural sixth, going down to the fifth. So that half step motion there is similar to the Phrygian mode. Not really sure why it's super important, but I mark them because they were something that was talked about in my harmony class. They're not super exceptional, but it's interesting to see how many half cadences are Phrygian half cadences rather than not Phrygian half cadences. We also have a diminished fifth leap here in the tenor, which is a cardinal sin in tonal harmony when you're talking about voice leading. So after our 4-6 chord, we would expect 5, A, E, C sharp, and A major, and we get a repeat of the same chord on beat 3. Next phrase takes us to the key of A minor, ends in a perfect authentic cadence, but we cadence on A major, which is the dominant of D minor, so it fulfills itself as a D minor overall idea. But I think the modulation here is direct because we have C natural versus C sharp, so A major turns into A minor, which is the tonic in the key of A minor. We then have E, A, did I read that right? E, A, E, and B. A is a 4-3 suspension over the bass, but we're expecting 5. maybe even 5-7, because we get a little delayed passing seventh here that happens a 16th note after this G sharp. And then we get F, A, C, and A, which is our 6th chord, F major, a deceptive progression, 5 going to 6, passing 7th here. B natural is a non-chord tone, D is a non-chord tone, E is a passing 7th, C is a chord tone. We then get D, D, F, and A, D minor, root position, that's our 4 chord. A little delayed passing 7th here, and B natural is a non-chord tone as well, which does for a very brief moment leave us with B minor 7 flat 5. It's 2 half diminished. Not super important that you include that analysis, just saying that these are non-chord tones is really all that matters, because they are regardless of whether or not a chord is formed incidentally. We would expect 4 or 2 to operate as a predominant here, which is what we get. E, B, E, and G sharp. It's E major. D is our chordal 7th, which kind of serves as an enclosure around this C sharp here, which turns our A chord into an A major chord, A, C sharp, E, and A. And when Bach cadences in the key of the minor dominant, he often cadences using the Picardy third, which just ends up sort of functioning like a half cadence in the grand scheme of the form. But moving on to the next phrase, we stay in the key of A minor at the beginning, and then we see some interesting key changes here where we go to C and then interestingly to F at the end of the phrase, with something that we've come across in the chorales before, which is an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of the subdominant, which I call a subdominant cadence because it's often the case that Bach will modulate very quickly to the key of the subdominant at the end of the phrase, and it just has an interesting characteristic to it that doesn't quite feel like a modulation, but because there isn't vocabulary or a term to describe this cadence where we cadence on the 4 in the key of C major, I guess we're modulating to the key of F. So starting things off with an A minor chord, going to reiterate the Roman numeral because it's A minor and not A major. We then get A, D, F, and B, B minor 7 flat 5 over A, which is 2, 4, 2. We typically expect these to resolve down by step, and typically the roots are a fifth apart as well. G sharp, D, E, and B, and that is the case. We would expect a 2, 4, 2 chord to resolve to some type of 5, 6 chord. In this case, the fifth is intact. And we typically would expect a tonic after this, A, C, E, and C, A minor, root position. And then we get E, E, G, and C. G is not a passing 7th, but it's the 7th of our A minor chord. It's kind of interesting here that we do get kind of like a passing C major chord in first inversion, 3-6. You could say that A minor is the point of modulation here as well, but I don't really hear it until the next beat, and also the fact that it's happening on the end of the beat puts it in like a weak case. Bach, in my opinion, has modulated on the end of the beat before, but usually the situations are more exceptional than this one. 3 often goes to 4, or actually, sorry, 3 often goes to 4, which it does in this case as well. F, D, A, and D. 4, 6, 3, 6 to 4, 6 is a pretty common progression, and we would expect this maybe to be our point of modulation to the next key, where D minor is now our supertonic, and that spins off into a 2-5-1 progression in the key of C major. D is also a chord tone, so we don't have to mark it. We get G, D, G, and B, which is our 5 chord. Apologies for the engines in the background if that's coming through on the microphone. Passing 7th in the bass, and then we get C major, E, C, G, and C, 1, 6. And this could be a point in which we modulate to the key of F major as well, but I'm going to say that because we get a couple of neighbor tones here on the end of the beat, and then we get the same chord again, I'm going to say this is the point that we modulate, because there's really no reason to suggest that we've modulated if we see the same chord twice, unless there's some type of chromaticism like a B flat somewhere that tells us that we've moved to the key of F before this. So we'll call this second C, 5, 6. C is a chord tone, E is a chord tone, and then we cadence on our tonic F major. F, C, F, and A. And interestingly, Bach continues in the key of F major into the next phrase as well, which in this case makes more sense because F is relative to the key of D minor, as opposed to if this piece were in the key of C major and he were to have continued in the key of F, that would have been more interesting. So we start off with another F chord. The only difference is that the bass leaps down an octave, and then we move to the next phrase, which has, the next system, which is C, C, F, and G. Little 4/3 suspension here over the bass. It's very common over dominant triads in root position. You could even call this a 5/7 chord in the same way that we saw this 5/7 chord here, where we have a little delayed passing seventh here in the alto, but here it's in the tenor. And then we get D minor, D, A, D, and F tonic triad, sub-mediant triad in root position, another deceptive progression, similar to what's happening here in this phrase. Maybe these phrases are kindred spirits, like B and B prime, who knows. Passing seventh in the bass. Then we get B flat, A, D, and F. I think this A is a 4/3 suspension, a 7/6 suspension over the bass, which would make this 2/6/5. Probably makes more sense after a 6 chord, and we know that Bach loves 2/6/5 chords, especially in cadential contexts. But you could also analyze this as 4/7 as well, B flat major 7. They're both basically functioning the same way, and they're only a whole step apart from one another in terms of their differences in pitch content. Then we get C, G, C, and E, which is our 5 chord C major. A is a passing tone, little delayed passing tone. B flat is a little neighboring 7th, and then our perfect authentic cadence concludes with F major, F, A, C, and F. Okay, moving on to the next phrase, we have a bit of an interesting progression. We end with a half cadence in the key of D minor, but do we start the phrase in D minor? So we start off with an A major chord. I had originally analyzed this whole phrase in the key of D minor, but what ended up happening was, because this phrase here sounded quintessentially F major like, D, E, F, and then we get a C natural here in the bass, it felt too F major like to quantify, or I guess qualify, as a D minor phrase. I mean, numerically it would have been fine if we had any more reason to mark it as such, but with the C naturals and the B flats, it's kind of difficult to say. We would expect more C sharps in the key of D minor. So I think that even though we start off with A major, we're still in the key of F major until we see more D minor context nearing the end of the phrase. So we have C sharp, A, E, and A. It's 5/6 of 6, or if you choose to analyze this phrase in the key of D minor, it's just 5/6, and I'd call this a direct modulation because of the gap and because of the unlike C sharps. We then have D minor, D, A, E, and F. 9/8 suspensions are very common over tonic triads, and this D minor chord is being tonicized, so that makes sense. Also, 9/8 suspensions are also common over D minor chords in general, which is kind of interesting, even if they're not functioning as a tonic triad, which I think is pretty peculiar. But 6 often is the beginning of a predominant dominant tonic progression that consists of 6 going to 5/6 going to 1, which is what we get here. E, C, C, and G, C major over E, passing 7th here in the tenor, and then we get our tonic F major, F, A, C, and A. This would be a 5/6/1/7/3 progression if we were in the key of, or 7/6/1 or 3 progression if we were in the key of D minor at this point. We also have some interesting inner voices here where we have B natural going to C natural as opposed to C sharp, which coincidentally gives us B minor 7 flat 5 over F, which is 7/7 of 5, F, B natural, D, and A, and that resolves to 5, so this B natural here is pretty interesting. C, C, E, and G, with a passing 7th here in the tenor, and that takes us to D minor, another deceptive progression, D, A, E, and F. And the fact that we have a 9/8 suspension here is also kind of indicative of the fact that we have a tonic triad here. Something's being tonicized. So it's 6 here in the key of F, and it's our tonic in the key of D. And the reason why I'm analyzing this as D minor here, even though we get another D minor chord on beat 2, is because we see C sharp going on during the space in between the beats, which is the leading tone to D. So the fact that we're getting that extra little tonicization going on here means that we're probably in the key of D minor. Just a small detail, but it doesn't make too much of a difference. Passing tone in the bass, C sharp's a little enclosure, and then we get first inversion, F, A, D, and A. D also briefly takes our chord and puts it in root position here, before we end with a 4-3 suspension half cadence, A, C sharp, and E. And the chorale closes out with a perfect authentic cadence in the key of the tonic, with probably the most interesting talking point of this chorale. We have D minor to resolve our half cadence, D, A, D, and F, root position, and then we get D, B flat, E, and G. We've seen this chord progression before, with 1 going to 2-4-2, E minor 7 flat 5 over D, but instead of getting the rest of the voices where we get an A major chord, we only get C sharp little neighboring here in the bass, which does technically turn this chord into a 7-7 chord very briefly, but I feel like it's more of just an embellishing tone than it is a... Actually, you know what? I'm going to walk that back. I'm going to walk that back and say that this is not a 2-4-2 chord, and this is actually not that remarkable. In fact, I'm going to say that this is a lower suspension underneath the alto, and this is just a 9-10 suspension, and this is in fact just a 7-7 chord. I was going to say this is like some type of 2 chord going to a 1 chord, but I don't think that that's exactly what's happening. With only one voice happening, 2 is so close to 7, and I think that that's what's happening here in terms of the big picture. So apologies for what I prefaced this phrase with something interesting. It's really just a lower suspension, kind of similar to the beginning of the chorale actually. However, instead of a 5 chord, we get a 7 chord. And then we get our tonic D, A, E, and F, which is implying our 1 chord, but in typical Bach fashion, the bass changes and we get an inversion of the same chord. In this case, it's just D minor over F. We then get G, B flat, D, and E. E minor 7 flat 5 over G, which is 2-6-5. We know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords, especially in cadential contexts. G is a chord tone, C sharp is not a chord tone, B natural is a chord tone. It's actually kind of interesting that we have B natural not happening at the same time as B flat, but in very close proximity to one another. And then we get our our dominant A major, A, E, C sharp, and E. A is a chord tone, G is a little passing 7th, and then we cadence on not D minor but D major, which is what we would expect at the end of one of Bach's minor chorales. D, F sharp, A, and D. And that is today's analysis. Really not too much to write home about here except for the subdominant cadence, which is something that was a lot more common in the sort of like early mid part of the series, but they've been making a bit of a resurgence recently, which is exciting because I'm happy to know that it's not really a fluke. But yeah, really not too many takeaways in this chorale. All the harmonies relatively straightforward. We do have a mid-phrase modulation going on here, which is pretty interesting as well. But I think I'm going to cap the video off on those thoughts. Really not too much to talk about in this one. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon and like the video if you enjoyed the content as well. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.